Okay, once again, good morning. This will be your first module or the module number 5 in your finals in computer programming 11A. So, I am assuming that as of the moment, you already know how to create your very simple program. Okay, you can simply print some string literals. You can already, what do you call this one? Uh, declare some variables and declare some variables with different data types. You are now aware on how to at least create a program that will accept user input, yung mga ganyan, and can perform some basic arithmetic operation and some basic logical flow operations sa program natin. So, ina-assume ko na yan na alam nyo na dapat yan as for now. Okay? Now, starting from this module up to the very last module, ito na po yung tinatawag ko lagi sa students ko na logic part ng programming. Meaning, this will be the start of where you will really either love or hate programming. Basic pa lang kasi talagang ginagawa natin ng midterm. Hindi pa tayo totally nag-iisip. Okay? We can just simply follow what's written in the instruction and that's it. So for now, we will talk about module number 5, which is what we call the decision control structures. Okay? Or control flows, na tinatawag. Now, pag sinabi kasi natin control flows, okay, from the word itself, control flow, it's a sequence, yeah. It's a sequence of execution of a group of statements. So therefore, your program later on will have some logic, will now follow a certain sequence. Paikot na yan, umiikot na siya, kung ano-ano na nangyayari, either babalik sa umpisa, babalik sa pinakagitna, babalik sa pinakababa. Diba? So, yung ginagawa natin kasi for the meantime, we just simply ask the user to input something and that's it. Okay? And some statement may need to be executed in sequential fashion. Some may have to be repeated, while others may or may not be executed depending on some condition. Tinatawag. So, for this module, we will really focus on the first the second kasi madali lang naman i-discuss yung first part ng control structure natin. Well, by the way, there are 3 available control structures in Java programming. Sequential, decision control structures, and of course, repetition control structures. So, dito tayo ngayon mag-focus the decision control structures. So, for now, let's talk about sequential control. Pag sinabi nating sequential control structures, it's usually organized where the statements or each line of codes can now be executed one by one. Ito yung tinatawag ko madalas na top-down. Okay? Top-down type ng programming. Meaning, you have here a variable, di ba? You have here another variable and a particular just add the print line dito. And, di ba? Now, Java will simply execute these lines of code line per line from top to bottom. Di ba? So, we have here the line 5, line number 6, line number 7, line number 9. That will be executed sequentially na tinatawag natin. Okay? Sequential naman. Now, I want you guys to at least open your Google Chrome and tayo dito sa, yan. Gawa tayo ng flow, tuturuan ko kayo kung paano gumawa ng flowchart na tinatawag natin. I guess pwede na dito eh. Yan. Lucid app. I'll post the link here. Alright. So, I'm going to at least discuss how to create what we call flowcharting. Yan. So, punta tayo dito sa app na to and tuturuan ko kayo kung paano gumawa ng flowchart. All right. Now, flowcharts are actually being used to visualize the steps or the processes of or the logical steps or processes ng iyong program, tinatawag natin. And usually, your flowchart will first start as a circle. Tandaan yun ha. Flowchart will always start as a circle. Yan. And eventually, it will also end as a circle. We have here the end, and we have here the start. Now, since pinag-uusapan nga natin ng sequential flow ng program natin, let's just simply try to visualize how it looked like using a flowchart. Okay? Now, circle simply indicates that it's the start and at the same time, it's the end of a specific process. Okay? Ngayon, maglalagay tayo dito ng tinatawag na, yan, we have here a process. Ano ibig sabihin ng process? In Java programming, the processes are depending on what you are doing. Either you are declaring a variable, yan, or declaring another variable, tapos, yan, either printing a string or print, kamo na lang. Okay? Remember that. Rectangles are processes. So it can be a declaration of variable, it can be a user input, it can be a print method. Naman. Okay? Now, kung napansin natin, meron ding arrow dito. Arrow simply indicates the flow of your program. So therefore, kaya itututok natin yan dito, this simply indicates that your program will, from the start, okay, from the very beginning, will declare a variable, yan. Tapos, meron tayo ulit ditong panibagong arrow. Yan. This will indicate the flow of your program. Yan, tandaan natin to kasi napaka-importante ito. Gagamitin at gagamitin lagi natin to. Yan. So, kung napansin nyo, that's what we call the sequential. And we try to visualize them using this app here na meron tayo. Okay? So, from the start, we declared a variable, we declared another variable, and we printed out something. Now, you can use these other processes here, like the predefined process, pero hindi siya totally nagagamit. Simplihan lang natin. Ito lang rectangle na meron dito. Okay? Balik tayo dito sa natin. Naintindihan naman siguro natin, no? So, therefore, we have here a sequential control structure. Madali lang. 'Di ba? Kasi line per line ng code natin in-execute yung program natin. Now, next is where we will focus for today. This is what we call the decision control structures. Pag sinabi nating decision control structures, ayan, basahin natin, it's organized in such a way that there should be a condition to be evaluated first, okay? And the behavior of the program will depend on the truthfulness of a condition being tested. The result of the evaluation will yield to either true or false. So, nakita niyo yung mga words dito, merong tinatawag na condition, yan. Merong tinatawag na evaluation, okay? And meron tayong tinatawag na result, which is true or false only. The result of the condition will then dictate the course of action to be taken. Now, for the decision control structures, meron tayong iba't ibang parts dyan pag-aaralan. Number one is what we call the if statement. Tindihin natin ng if statement ha. Pag sinabi nating if statement, based on the syntax here, okay? Number one, we have here an if followed by a closing parenthesis, followed by a Boolean expression. referencing our module number 3, in which kung saan natuto tayo kung paano gumamit ng mga arithmetic operators, yan, logical operators, yung mga ganyan. Yun yung example natin ng Boolean expression. Okay, so followed by the Boolean expression and followed by the closing parenthesis. Now, below that, with an indentation, is where the statement will happen. If the Boolean expression, okay, showed a true result, it will now execute this statement here. Tandaan nyo yun, ha? So, kung napansin natin, magkasunod lang sila na line. That's if statement. Or, otherwise, multiple lines can now be executed for as long as it is enclosed with an open and closing curly braces or blocks of code inside if statement. Tandaan natin yan, ha? Pagka iisa lang yung gusto nyo i-execute na statement niya, once na nag-true itong Boolean expression, yan, no need to add a closing and opening and closing curly brackets. Pero kapag multiple statement yung gusto nyong mag-execute, ganyan na mangyari. Maglalagay lang kayo niyan. Now, let's try to show that here sa may, ito natin, itong flowcharting natin. How does if statement control structure look like in a flowchart? Tingnan natin, ha? Pakita natin sa inyo. So, sabi doon, merong if statement. Now, usually, you have here the first process. Okay? So, halimbawa, ito, user input. Halimbawa yan, user input. So, automatic, kung ano yung magiging result nito, will go to the next part. Now, instead of us having another process in sequential data, sequential control structures earlier, meron na yung tinatawag na diamond. Ayan. May diamond na, may panibago ng shape, di ba? So, after nito, itong user input, pupunta siya ngayon dito sa, nangyari? Sa diamond. Ayun. Diba? Now, if statement, ganito ang mangyayari dyan. The if statement will now have two, the diamond or the decision part here will have two results later on, which is the true or false na tinatawag. So usually, yung true, papasok dito. Ayan. Yung false, papasok naman dito. Importante po ito, ha, so dapat alam nyo gumawa ng flowchart, guys. Kahit na alam kong, ewan ko kung nakikinig pa kayo at kausap ko lang computer ko dito. Okay. So, you have here true or false. Ayan. Again, from the start, you have here a user input followed by a decision. And once na nag-true yung condition dito, or sabihin natin condition na lang, condition, pag nag-true, it will now end the program. That's how simple if statements are working in terms of, of flowchart. Sa ngayon, wala pang result ang false kasi nasa if statement pa lang tayo. Okay? Now, let's try to understand or analyze this example program here. Ano ba itong example program natin dito? This program will just simply, write a program that will accept an integer value and determine whether this is a positive number. Okay. Now, usually what is happening in your case is that i-code nyo agad yung nangyayari or yung solution sa problem ninyo. Tama? Now, instead of us going to the coding part, let's try to convert this first, okay, into a flowchart. Gusto muna nating intindihin yung flowchart natin. Okay? Or yung problem natin. So sabi dito, you will create a program that will accept an integer and determine whether this is a positive number. Okay. Assuming na wala muna tong code natin dito, we can now create here a flowchart. Sabi ha, magki-create ng will accept an integer value and determine whether this is a positive number. So let's try to place that here muna. So sabi, will accept integer value, determine if this is a positive number. Okay. Gawin natin muna siyang flowchart. So you have your two worded clue here, okay? Accept integer value and determine. Pag sinabi nating determine, so meaning dito na papasok yung decision, yung diamond. So using flowchart here, how are we going to accept integer value? Number one is to, of course, declare a variable. Ha? Mag-declare muna tayo ng variable, syempre. So, bawa, yaan. Okay? So, after declaring the variable, you can now just simply add another process in which that particular variable will now be user will input number. Okay? Madali lang namang intindihin ng flowchart, di ba? So, after declaring a variable A, okay, alam natin na dyan i-store yung input natin. So, therefore, yan, nagawa na natin mag-accept ng integer value. So, okay na to. Check na yan. Next, how are we going to determine if that particular integer value is a positive or negative? Diyan ngayon papasok yung decision. So, now, you have to think of a condition in which will satisfy the problem here. Ano nga ba yung parang magiging condition natin dito para mag-accept tayo ng user? I mean, ma-check natin kung yung user is positive. Alam naman natin na magiging positive ang isang bagay if more than 0. Tama? Negative if less than 0. So, in terms of numbers, we can now just simply assume that if A is greater than 0, that will now be positive. Otherwise, if A is less than 0, that will be negative. Yung ilalagay natin dito. You can now just simply ask the user if A is greater than 0. If yes, okay. If yes, pwede tayo ngayon dito maglagay ng result which is positive. Okay? If statement muna tayo so hindi muna ako maglalagay ng negative kasi alam mo yun, nakalagay lang naman eh. So after determining or since na true na yan, lagay natin dito true. Yan. Since nag-true na yan, automatic, it will now terminate the program. Okay ba? Naintindihan ba natin kung paano gumawa ng flowchart? Very basic. Very simple. Diba? Now, let's go back to the problem here. The problem is a write program that will accept the integer value. So, okay na yan. And determine whether this is positive or negative. So, therefore, bago kasi kayo gumawa or gumamit ng coding, bago kayo kung ano-anong, alam niyo yun, scanner or buffered reader, you have to make sure to understand and analyze first your program. Okay? So, let's follow that. I'll now create a value or a variable num. Diyan ko i-store. value niyan. So, since naka-javax.swing ako, gamit tayo ng J-option pane, ha? So, we have here num is equal to integer parse int J-option pane that show input dialog. I'll enter number. Enter a number. Oh, yan. Ayos. Okay. So, okay na. May user input na tayo, di ba? Kapag niran natin yan. So, we declare the variable. We now perform the user input, just like this one, di ba? We declared a variable. We now perform the user input. So, A na lang to. Enter a number. And now, papasok ngayon yung tinatawag natin na if statement. So, if A is greater than 0, what will happen? Print natin, J-option pane dot show message dialog. And let's simply print positive. Huwag muna tayo maglalagay ng negative kasi wala pa naman yun sa program. So, if we run this one, for as long as you have inputted a number which is, greater than 0, definitely, ang magpapakita dyan is the word positive. Using if statement. Yan. Example here, 10 positive. Diba? So, kapag ka nag-enter tayo dito ng, for example, 0, the result should have or should be blank. Pag nag-enter tayo ng negative numbers, the result should be blank as well. Yan naman. So, if statement yan. And kung napansin natin, hindi ako gumamit ng open and close curly braces kasi gusto kong i-execute ang isang statement lang naman after nito. Okay? So, ito kasi ginamit ko dito is buffered reader. So, pwede nyo na gawin yan. Alright. So, yan, at least siguro feeling ko may idea naman kayo kahit walang nakikinig o walang sasalita. At least siguro na-gets nyo naman. Okay. Now, let's proceed dito. The sample program will now execute, an integer input if it is positive. Na the Boolean condition being tested must yield to a true in order for the statement under the if statement to be executed. So tandaan nyo for as long as this condition here besides the if word is true, automatic mag-execute lagi ito. Now, let's try to take a look dito sa program natin na pangalawa. Yes, kung napansin nyo, you can now add another if statement. Yan. Another if statement kung saan i-evaluate nyo naman ngayon yung value. Kung negative value ba yun. Diba? So, yan siya. Now, if you will try to convert that in what we called ito, tawag dito, flowchart. Okay. It will now look something like this. So, kasi if statement pa lang tayo so definitely walang false value dito. In this case, meron kang, yan, uulitin mo ulit to. Magkakaroon ka ng dalawang ganyan. Pupunta dyan. Tapos ito will be less than. This time, halos same lang. Pero ang pinagkaiba po is, yan, for as long as this is true, pasok ngayon sa negative. And eventually, the program will now be terminated. So that's how if statement works. Okay? Any questions so far? Wala naman? Okay, mukhang wala naman Yan. So, basahin nyo na lang to. Yun yung purpose naman ng module kasi pinabasa. Yun naman yung purpose ko, ba't ko din i-discuss para maintindihan nyo lalo. Alright. Now, ayan, when the user inputs 5, the value is stored in the variable. Dito, halimbawa, sa letter A or sa num. Okay? So, once na nag-true siya, automatic, mag-execute ito. And so on. Now, let's proceed to the next example here. Okay? Write a program that will accept a number representing the day of the week. Thereafter, the program will display the equivalent day. So, paano yun? Sabi dito, gawin muna natin yung problem. Will accept a number representing day. Tapos, display the equivalent day. So therefore, ang mga days kasi natin is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and so on. So Monday simply means 1, Tuesday means 2, Wednesday means 3, and so on. So kung gagamit tayo ng flowchart dyan, user will now input number. Gagawa kayo ng 7 diamond dito. So if this is 1, definitely, if A is now equal to 1, take note ha, if A is now equal. In Java programming, I guess na ano niyo na to, na nakita niyo na to sa module 3. Double equals po para maging condition. Kapag ka single lang 'yan kasi, hindi siya parang math, okay? Programming ito kaya double equals lagi. Para mapag-compare nyo, is A equals to 1? Parang ganyan. So if A is equal to 1, papasok siya sa Monday. If A is equal to 2, pasok siya sa Tuesday. And the rest is history. Kayo na yung bahala. Diba? So, kung napapansin natin dito, yung program natin, let's try to analyze. Yan. I declared the variable day, which now be the variable where the user input will be stored. Nasaan yung input natin? Ito, input a number from 1 to 7. So, nag-store siya saan? Sa day na ito, variable. Now, the day variable will now be checked, okay, the condition. If the day is 1, it will now print this particular string message. If day is 2, it will now print this. If day is 3, print, and so on. Pero kung napansin natin dito kasi, gawin natin ha. So, int day, tapos day is equal to integer, that parse int, day option pane, that show input dialog, null, tapos enter a day. From 1 to 7. Yan. Pero kung napansin natin dito, kanina kasi walang ganyan, di ba? So this time, we added here a open and close curly braces. Therefore, if for as long as this day is equal to 1 and that simply resulted into true, it will now print these statements. Yan. That day is Monday. That day is Monday. Yan. Have a nice day. So for as long as this is true, lahat po ng statement sa loob nito will now be executed. Unlike kanina nung wala ito, pag ganyan kasi, ito tandaan nyo ha, pag ganyan na walang open close curly braces, ang mag-execute lang or mag-result lang ng true is ito lang. Tandaan nyo ha, yung next line lang. Ito wala nang pakiyan. Magpiprint yan ng separate. Parang ang mangyayari dyan, ganyan na siya. Pagbabasahin ng program. Pero, pagka nilagay nyo siya sa ganyan, alam ni Java na, ito pala yung may execute once na day is equal to 1. Okay? So, ganun siya. Ayan. Now, tignan din natin tong part na to. Ayan o. it doesn't have any open and closing curly braces. So therefore, the only one that will now be executed is just simply below this one, the condition, if day is equal to 1, if day is equal to 2, and so on. Diba? So, yan. Note that this program is better than the previous one. One of the desirable qualities that an aspiring programmer should have is the ability to factor out common instructions to reduce the perceived length and complexity of a program. Yeah, that is really true, by the way. Kapag ka nagko-code po kayo, hindi po ito pahabaan ng code. Tandaan natin ha. Feeling nyo yata, pagka mas mahaba yung code na or solution ng code na ginawa ninyo sa program ninyo, magmumukhang cool yung buong program. In reality, no. The longer the code, the more time it will need to be executed in the Java virtual machine. And therefore, kapag mas mahaba yung oras na mag-execute yan, okay, magkakaroon ng problema later on yan. Lalo kapag medyo, imagine, pagka-app yan, mobile app na, tapos sobrang haba na ng ginagawa mo. Diba? So, magiging medyo iba talaga ang itsura nun. Mag-iiba. And you will eventually learn that pagdating nyo sa college, pagka nag-enroll na kayo sa computer science or IT. It will now matter. Paiksian po ng code yan. Actually, kaya gustong-gusto kong gumamit din ng show message dialog, itong J-option pin, kasi mas maiksi. Wala nang kaek-ekan na ganyan-ganyan. Diba? So, yun. Any question? Wala pa rin. Wala pa rin question. Okay. Sige. Proceed tayo. If statement pa rin tayo, ha? If statement. Alright, let's try to analyze this problem here. Sabi dito, in temperature countries like Japan, there are 4 seasons. April to June is spring. July to September is summer. October to December is autumn. And then January to March is winter. Now, write a program that allows the user to input the month. Okay? Input the month to its numeric equivalent. Example, January 1 is 1, February is 2, and so on. So, kung napansin natin dito, ayan o, kung napansin natin dito, for as long as the user is trying to input numbers from 1, 2, 3, 4 simultaneously, yan, automatic winter ang lalabas. Technically, this entire program here is correct. Actually, wala akong magagawa kung ito yung sinamit nyo, basic instruction, perfect na yan. Kasi gumagana eh. Tapos na kita natin yung output na gusto natin. So, wala na akong problema. But the problem there, I am actually trying to look for some ways sa inyo as a student kung paano nyo mapapaiksi ito. Kasi this is what we call brute force algorithm na tinatawag natin. Okay? Brute force algorithm. And sabi ko nga, the longer the code, of course, the more time it will need to be executed. So in this case, babasahin niyo muna isa-isa yan. Okay, so gawa tayo dito ng example natin. 8 month. Tapos, month is equal to integer, the parse, integer, parse int, tapos, J option, main, show input dialog, null, input a number, input a number, from 1 to 12. Okay. So, ito ng month. Pwede natin kasing mapaiksi yan by simply using what we call, and a better solution to the season program is, number 1, using logical OR. So, napaka-importante na nakita nyo yung module number 3 natin at pinag-aralan nyo siya at sinagutan nyo ng maayos kasi gagamitin talaga natin yan. Now, anong ibig sabihin ulit ng logical OR based from the module number 3? Logical OR are simply an operation where it will result into true for as long as all of the condition or one of the condition is true. Tandaan nyo na, for as long as one of the condition is true, it will now result into true. So, gawa tayo dyan ng, nakita ko sa inyo yung tinatawag natin na truth table. Programming. Ayan, ewan ko lang kung mas maintindihan nyo to. Ito na lang. Hindi na, ito na lang. Truth table ha. And meron tayong tinatawag dito na OR operator. Huwag na nga ito. Dito na lang. Sige, tandaan niya, for as long as one of the condition is true, therefore, and magre-result siya into true. So, for as long as you or the user typed month 1, and tapos or month 2, or ulit equals month 3, and we'll simply print out here, print lang natin, the season is winter. Okay, nagets nyo ba? So, tingnan nyo ha, analyze natin to. Ang purpose kasi nito, itong or na to, for as long as tinype mo dito is either of the following, either 1, either 2, or either 3, tandaan nyo, kahit alin dyan, basta nagpakita dito na true, 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 automatic it will execute this one. That's what we call the OR, logical OR operators. However, pag sinabi naman nating logical AND, okay? Pag sinabi nating logical AND, you have to make sure that this statements here or each statements or conditions must be true. So, ito kasi tatlong condition meron tayo. Diba? So, this is one condition, two condition, and three conditions. Or simply check outs if one of the condition is true. Therefore, this is true. That's OR. Pero pag sinabi nating AND, you have to make sure that both conditions, each conditions here, should be true. In that case, pwede natin itong i-convert into a way na mas maiksi by using OR operator. So ano bang gusto natin mangyari dyan? For as long as the user nag-type ng 1 to 3, okay, from 1 to 3, is true or is winter, kamo na. Diba? So we can do that by simply checking out if month is greater than or equal to 1, and at the same time, if month is less than or equal to 1, we'll now print this one. Okay, saan nakuha ni Sir yan? Saan nakuha ni Sir itong pinagsasabi niyang month equals na yan? Month equals 3 pala. Okay. Ito, saan ko nakuha to? Diyan papasok yung logic. Diyan papasok yung pag-iisipan nyo. Pero para may idea kayo, this is how you check the condition for a range values. Ibig sabihin ng range values, kung gusto mong i-check ang minimum hanggang sa maximum value. So in this case, ang minimum natin is 1, maximum natin is 3. Okay? So, pag meron tayong program na 1 to 12, halimbawa, minimum is 1, maximum is 12. How you check the range. And tignan nyo maigi ha. If the user have input 1, it will now check this condition. Tanya, is month greater than or equal to 1? Yes. Pero end operation kasi yan. So therefore, dapat itong pangalawang operation or condition na to should result into true. So, true na to. Tama? This is true. Check niya ngayon, is month less than or equal to 3? Or is 1 less than or equal to 3? True. So therefore, true yan, nag-execute dito. Tandaan nyo ha, ang AND operator, both condition. Pag OR operator, kahit isa lang yan ang mag-true, pasok na yan dito. So kung itutuloy nyo yung program dito, ito, analyze nyo to, check nyo, di ba? So, pag winter, 1 hanggang 3 lang ang pwedeng i-type. Pero pagka spring, ayan o, yung 4 hanggang 6 lang. Pagka summer, 7 to 9. Pagka autumn, 10 hanggang 12. Nagets naman natin yon? Yes, sir. Alright, so that's if statement. Okay, if statement. So hopefully nagagets pa naman natin, nakaka-survive pa naman. Next, pasok tayo sa tinatawag natin na if-else statement. Okay, so this time, we have here a new syntax or a new keyword, which is else. Let's try to visualize that in our flowchart. Naman, kapag meron kang from declaring a variable user input, you have here a decision. Okay. Pero this time, sabi ko kanina, di ba, if that is yes, either mag-terminate. If it is no, ayan, papasok ang panibagong process, then will eventually terminate. So dito ngayon papasok yung if else. Yung kanina kasing ginagawa natin if lang eh. As in if lang talaga, literal. If the decision is true, dito lang. If the decision is not true or false, yan. Walang nangyayari. Pero this time, may mangyayari na kapag yung decision resulted into a false value. Okay? So, tingnan natin ito. Yan, ganun po yung ibig sabihin yan. So, if the condition is true, execute the following statements. Otherwise, take note, otherwise, execute these statements. Now, let's try to recreate the positive and negative problem that we have here. So, if have inputted a num, lang tayo, string in, okay, mag-buffered reader tayo. Buffered reader input equals new buffered reader, new input stream reader, system.in, system.out.println, input a number ng print line. It should be print lang. Wait lang pala ha. Check ako Uy, may naalala lang. Okay. Yan. Input a number. Now the num will be ano lang to, wala to ha. In is equal to input. Ito yung ayaw ko sa buffer reader, haba eh. Read line. Yan. Catch any errors, exception. Ano naman, no? System.out. Yan. Bakit yung error? Yun. Okay, so try natin. Pasok tayo dito. If yan, nag-enter na siya, it put a number. Let's try to store that in an integer that parse int. Yan. So, papasok ngayon dito yung if and else statement. So, if the number
is greater than or equal to 0, or greater than 0 rather, ano mangyayari? So that out of point line, number is positive. Yung kanina yung ginawa natin, gumamit pa tayo ng panibagong if. Diba? Pero this time, we have here what we call the else statement. Very easy to understand, kung napansin nyo. Number negative. Diba? So, if the number is greater than 0, therefore, papasok yun dito. But, if you have entered a negative value or not greater than 0, hindi ka na gumawa ng panibagong if statement dito, but rather, diretso kang else statement, definitely, yan yung papasok. Yan yung mag-execute next. Okay, nagets ba natin yung else statement? Yan yung una nating example. Now, ang purpose lang naman kasi ng else statement is actually para ma-visualize niyo dito. Yan. Ang purpose lang ng else statement is for you to be able to understand more what's happening in your program. Nagkakaroon ka na ng flow totally. Unlike yung kanina kasi, kumbaga, nung if statement lang, wala pa tong part na to eh. This is really invisible or not really visible sa part natin. Diba? So, by adding an else statement here, yan, and adding an else statement, it will now automatically proceed to the next process and eventually will end the process. Okay? Now, another thing here is what we call the nested if statements. Pag sinabi kasi nating nested if statement, ito, gawin nyo na lang to on your own. Pero, basically, you are trying to add an if statement inside another if statement. Paano yun? Paano naging possible yun? Kung i-visualize natin yan, okay, ganyan na lang muna. And pag sinabing nested if, tanggalin natin to. If the decision is true, okay, papasok yan into an entirely new decision control structure. Tapos, i-check niya ulit yung panibagong condition. If that is true, kung no, papasok siya dito, execute yung process, and will eventually end. That's how nested if statements are working. Meron kang panibagong if statement sa loob ng if statement. Say for example, itong number na positive and negative natin. Okay. Gusto natin na, ito example gusto natin na kapag nag-enter si user ng gusto natin na kapag nag-enter si user ng number which is positive, i-check niya ulit if yung number belongs to 1 to 3 para sabihin nating winter. Diba? Yung parang kaninang ginawa natin. If num is greater than or equal to 1 and num is less than or equal to 3, therefore, is winter. Yan. So, ganyan po ang itsura ng nested if statement. So, check natin ulit. Yan. So, nag-declare ka ng variable. Nag-input si user ng number. Now, the user will check if the number is greater than 0, it will print number is positive. Pero, for as long as it is greater than 0, i-check niya ulit yung panibagong condition. Okay? So, if this is true, it will now print this one. And eventually, magte-terminate na to. Lalabas na siya ng if statements. Kasi ito yung na-execute hindi ito So, kapag ka naglagay ka dito, yan, pagka nag-positive ito or nag-true, dito pa lang na statement, automatic yan ang mag-execute. This will now be left behind. Gets ba natin? Okay. So, kapag ka ito naman, diba, nag-enter ka ng negative na number. Pwede ka ngayon maglagay dito. ng panibago, in which if the number you have entered is equal to -2, for example, yan. That's how you, what do you call this one? You nest if statements. So medyo ano to pag depende sa problem, intindihin niyo maigi yung problem dito sa the module. The number is -2. So naglagay ako dito ng example kung saan makikita nyo. Ayan, yung input and so on. Kung ako sa inyo, gawin nyo to on your end kasi mahaba pag ito-type ko to. Analyze nyo na saan dyan yung mga condition. So kung napansin nyo to you have here a condition. Yan. Tapos sa loob ng condition, may nangyari. Try catch since input.io yan. And so on. Alright. Next, we have here what we call the cascading if-else statements. Pag sinabi natin cascading if-else statements, ayan, you have here the keyword else if. So parang yung ano natin, itong sample natin na to. Pwede natin to. Ayan. If the number is 0, it will execute something. Else if the number, or sabihin natin ito na lang. If the number is 1, it will execute Monday. Otherwise, imbes na else lang, pwede ka ulit maglagay dito ng if the number is 2, pwede ka ulit mag-execute ng panibago, Tuesday. Pwede ka ulit mag-execute din ng panibago, 3, Wednesday, and so on. That's how you create if else if. So after ng if statement, imbes na else agad or panibagong if statement, pwede mo na lang silang i-combine pareho. So kung i-ano natin yan dito sa flowchart natin, yan. The user will now input, tapos i-check niya yung decision. Kapag ka nag-no, okay, pagka nag-no, imbes na process yan, papasok ang panibagong condition. Ayan, di ba? So if the first decision is true, terminate the program, which printed out Monday. Otherwise, if the decision is not true or the condition is not true, and it will now proceed to another condition. Okay? And if the condition is true, dun sa pangalawang condition, then it will terminate. Pero kung hindi siya true, meron ko ulit ditong panibagong decision. Di ba? Medyo marami-rami. Kaya ang saya ng Java Yan. Di ba? No? Kapag ka yes, pasok ka dito. Yan. Pag no, pwede ka ulit maglagay ng panibago. Yan yung tinatawag natin na cascading if-else statements. So, ganyan yung magiging itsura niyan. Hindi mo, kumbaga, ganyan siya. Napakadaming conditions na i-check niya. Nagets naman natin? Yes, sir. Okay. So, parang ito, dito sa season program, di ba? Yung kanina, wala pa tong else if, pero after mong i-check tong sa end statement na to, meron lang itong condition na to, and so on. Pero this time, naglagay tayo ng else if. Yan, else if. Yan. Okay. So, malapit tayo matapos. Dito na tayo sa pinaka-last natin na example, which is what we call the switch statement. Now, this is an entirely different thing pagdating sa control structure or decision control structures. Now, when we say switch statement, it's an alternative to cascading if-else statements. Now, you have here the following syntax. You have the keyword switch with an expression Followed by ito, yung another keyword natin na case na tinatawag. Yung case natin dito will now be having a value of depende kung ano yung gusto mong condition. Pasok tayo dito sa example natin na day program. So, yung day program, int day, punta tayo ulit sa J option pane na lang. Day is equal to integer that parse in, integer that parse in J option pane that show input dialog null input a number from 1 to 7. Ano ba yan? Yan. Pag sinabi natin switch case kasi, you have here the keyword switch. Follow this, you have the keyword switch and will now eventually check the day or the number that you have inputted there. Now, instead of having an if statement, meron ka na tawag na case 1. Ibig sabihin yan, for as long as you input the number 1, it will now print the option pane that show message dialog null Monday. Next, kapag ka nagprint ako ng 2, ganun din. Message dialog null Tuesday. Gets nyo ba? So, kapag nag-input ako ng 3, ganyan din. Wednesday. Yan. Ganun lang siya. Ganun ang switch case. Sir, paano kapag ka mismong word? So, halimbawa, word yan. String, input, day, kamo na lang. Kumbaga, ang gusto natin is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Is it still case number 1, number 2, number 3? No. Pwede kang maglagay dito ng if the user tried to input Monday, for example, or since, ano yan, ganyan. Yan kasi, di ba? So, the user input Tuesday, the user input Wednesday. Yan, ganyan siya. Pagka-string. Yes, Aldrin, you have a question? Kindly ask me lang po. So, ganun po ang, switch case kung napansin nyo. Pero ang, neto, pangit lang dito, kailangan sakto or case sensitive yan ng Monday. Or, case sensitive lahat ng input mo. Papasok siya sa case statements. You have any question? Yan, tinan nyo to yung sa season program naman, yung month. So kapag ka nag-enter siya ng number na 1, 2, 3 hanggang 12, ayun. So it will now depend on you kung anong gusto nyong gamitin. If statement ba, if na may else if, and or cascading if else statements, or switch cases. So depende po kung ano yung gusto nyong gamitin. Now, depende rin yan sa magiging instructions ko, syempre. Now, you have here the following seat work. Antok na ako. Okay. Sabi dito, and this is 5 points each. Tandaan nyo ha. Nako, seat work pa lang ito pero 5 points each na. So, 30 points agad pala ito lahat. Nako, patay tayo niyan. Okay. Using if-else statement. Hindi ko na kayo pagawa ng flowchart. Saka na. Yan. Accept an integer value and display whether the number is odd or even number. Nako, napakadali niyan. Diba? So, mag-i-input ng number, check kung yung number is odd or even number. Ano nga ba yung mga odd numbers? 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, so on. Pag even numbers, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, and so on. Number 2, ask the user to input either 1 or 0. If the input value is 1, then the program should display true, otherwise display false. Naku, madali lang din yan. Kaya nyo na yan. If else statements pa lang naman yan. Okay, and for the performance task, which is basically an analyzation of your what you have learned for today. Teamwork pa lang yun, yung 1 to 5. 1 to 6. Ayan pala, tapos na pala tayo eh. Sakto. 1.5 hours ang discussion.